So, hello everyone. How's, how's everyone doing? Good? Great, me too. Feels good to be back again, NGBE second edition. And I'm super excited I can open up this conference. I've never done this before, so it's really a pleasure and an honor, and I hope I can set the tone of the conference with this talk. Because I'm going to talk about Angular Elements, which is a super new thing. It's very new, it's not even a thing yet. It's not really released yet. So I think that's going to be exciting. I hope you will like it. Right, my name is Pascal. You can find me on Twitter. Who's on Twitter here? Oh, that's a lot of people. Man, cool. My Twitter handle is right there. You can follow me if you want. I'm a GDE for the Angular team, so I try to help in the community, giving feedback back to the core team, but also helping everyone in the community to be successful with Angular. I'm also doing software training, Angular training with ThoughtRam with a couple of very talented people. And since recently, I'm working on a project called Machine Labs, which is in which we're trying to make machine learning accessible to everyone. Also with a very talented group of people. So if you're into that kind of topic, maybe you want to talk to me about that. Right, so if you can't read something here because of maybe something's too small or anything, the slides are up here. I'll leave this here for like about 5 seconds. Otherwise, yeah, just use the wonderful displays here. I think they look quite good. And then another thing, who knows this logo right there? Okay, one person in this room knows this logo. This is the Angular Labs logo. And Angular Labs is a project from the Angular team under which new things are being tried out. So it's like very experimental. Everything that you're going to see today in this talk, at least the Angular specific things, are very experimental. That's what I meant with they're not actually released yet. They are somewhere in the code base, but it's really just playing around, early stages, probably even before alpha, I don't know. It's just like trying out new things and see where things are going. So Angular Elements is an Angular Labs project, okay? Keep that in mind. Don't necessarily use everything that I'm talking about today in production yet. Okay, I want to start with a little bit of a background. It happens that one of the core members of Angular, Rob Wormold, he already gave a talk about this topic earlier this year. And he started off with a pretty good like statement, and I very much agree with that. His statement was, this is Rob, by the way, he said, Angular is ideal for building complete applications, and our tooling and documentation and infrastructure are primarily aimed at this case. So this doesn't mean that Angular is like the most ideal framework out there or platform or whatever, right? The point here really is that Angular is very good at building complete applications, right? There's still a lot of things that need to be ironed out, and there's a lot of work to do in many different layers in Angular that where we can all do better. But I think we can all agree that Angular is really good at building complete applications. And what does complete applications actually mean? Well, it turns out that Angular comes with so many things, right? We have the core with like a compiler that allows us to do things like AOT compilation for faster applications. We have dependency injection, so we can write tests in a sane way. We have zone support, and then there's other things like an upgrade module. We have a router. We have animation. So even all of that on the slide, right? There's like HTTP support. There's forms. You get all of that out of the box for free, even, right? So that's so awesome. And then we have even like libraries that build on top of that, like Angular Material, which is like a UI library. Implementing the material design specification from Google, which is cool. Also, like we can just take it from GitHub or whatever. It's right there, high quality components. We can use them and are ready to go. And we have like tooling support is very good. We have a CLI. We have like a browser extension, Augury, that helps us developing applications, and language services to have better tooling in our IDEs and and whatnot. So Angular is pretty good at that. Still, there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's still some things where we can do better. And Rob continued, and he said, it's quite challenging to use Angular in scenarios that don't fit that specific single-page application model. What does that mean? Well, it turns out that using Angular inside Angular apps is all great, and that's where we can build complete applications and everything. But it turns out using Angular outside of Angular is rather like a tricky thing. And there are various use cases for that, right? Probably the biggest one is reusability of components. Like when you have a bigger company, you have several different teams working on different projects, and you maybe even start building up a library, like your own kind of component library inside of your company with your own like company IP and everything. You want to use these things across your projects. That's something that could be tricky. Or CMS pages. I was surprised how many people out there and actually do that. Like there's people came to me and asked like they were like talking about scenarios where they're working on content management systems where they try to generate like building blocks that are just like mini Angular apps, if you will. Or you have like multiple static websites. That's what most of the time CMSs are, at least the older ones. And then you have to like kind of build multiple apps for that. So that's a use case. Another one is like building widgets. There might be some overlapping there, but maybe you want to provide some sort of widget that other people can actually embed in their website, and they just get like a mini app that they can use. And there's probably many more use cases. So considering that, there's ways to make that possible. So it is kind of possible to do these things with Angular today, but it's not necessarily very easy, right? This really turns out to be rather tricky. And when we think about these things, I mean, Angular is not the only platform or framework with these problems. I guess you will find similar challenges in other frameworks as well. We might wonder and we might ask ourselves, what if there was a component model in the web that solves these problems, right? Some independent component model that enables us to just build components, throw them on the page, and then it just works magically, right? And now some people might think, oh, right, we have web components for that, right? Who knows web components here? Okay, well, that's actually less than I thought. Cool, then we can make a little detour. So web components is it's a technology, or rather, it's actually like an umbrella term for 4 different technologies, 4 different specifications, right? There's HTML templates, there's HTML imports, there's shadow DOM, and there's custom elements. So these are all like different specifications, and you can use all of them independently. Like you don't have to use all of them. You can just pick one if you want. You can pick 2 if you want, or use all of them. But at the end of the day, when we are talking about web components, we often refer to a combination of all of these, or maybe just one of these, most likely custom elements. And let's take a quick look at what those things actually are, just so that we get an idea of how the web tries to solve this problem of having a component model for the web, a native one. So templates, right? Templates are finally a way in HTML to define templates in templates. I don't know, maybe you're used to things like defining templates as script tags with like source template, like hex like that. The template tag is a thing that actually enables us to define a template in our documents, and we can instantiate those later at runtime. So they're sitting there, they're static. They're also inert, which means if you have any media related elements like images or videos or whatever, they don't start playing, they're not going to be fetched automatically, which is otherwise the case in the browser, right? They're sitting there and waiting for you to be activated, so you can take this template and put it somewhere in your app and then stamp it out. So that's what template is. And if you're using Angular, you might have seen the ng template tag, which is not just really inspired by this, it's actually kind of a successor to this, because originally Angular used the template tag as well. So Angular uses that, more or less, if you will. Another thing is HTML imports. It turns out that we have different ways to import things in our HTML documents. For example, we have the image tag to import images. We have like link tags to import style sheets and these kind of things, but we don't really have a way to, or we haven't had a way to really import HTML files, right? There was just no way. Apart from frame sets or iframes. And HTML imports is a specification that tries to solve that, right? You can basically go ahead and import an HTML file, with a single tag. But it turned out that it also comes with a lot of other problems when you have like components with dependencies and dependencies of dependencies. So vendor browsers they kind of abandoned it, and it's not likely going to be implemented in all the browsers anymore. Shadow DOM is the thing that enables DOM and style encapsulation. What does that mean? Basically, when you put an input tag, type date on the website, and you get a date picker just like that without doing anything else, that's Shadow DOM, right? It's a DOM behind the DOM. That's why it's called Shadow DOM. And it gives us style encapsulation and DOM encapsulation, which means styles defined inside your Shadow DOM don't bleed out of your page or into your page, and styles defined in your page don't bleed into the component. So you truly have encapsulation behind an element. And the last one, that's the important one that I want to focus on today, is custom elements. That's the specification that allows you as a developer to create new elements. It's blinking right there. So that's where the party is. It turns out that Angular is actually a thing that already tries to solve this since like many years, right? We can build components and directives, and they all have, like, we define custom elements and extend the browser vocabulary. Custom elements is the native equivalent to that, if you will. So let's say you want to build a loading spinner, right? Loading spinner tag, you put it on the page, you get a nice spinner, or maybe you even can configure it. That's what it should look like. And custom elements are really just like normal, like native DOM objects or elements. So they come with things like attributes, properties, methods, and events. It's all the same. We're all doing this since many years, right? If you know how to use native DOM elements, you know how to use custom elements. How do we define custom elements? Well, this is what it looks like. We have a class loading spinner. We have to extend the native HTML elements. And then there's a API on the global object or the window object, custom elements, and then .define. And what you do is you give it the name of the tag, and then you pass in your definition. And that basically registers your custom element. Until that happens, the thing in your document, the loading spinner, is like an HTML unknown element. That's how the browser sees it. It's not an error. It just kind of more or less ignores it. That's what browsers do. They do this thing called graceful degradation. So there's no error. They just have a DOM element that they just don't know until the point a custom element is registered. They also have attributes. So what we can do is we can define observed attributes, which means for example, we could have an attribute mode in which we want to define whether the loading spinner is like loading like forever, or if it has a certain state and only loads until a certain like value, 50% or something. So we can configure observed attributes, and then all we have to do is we define an attribute change callback, for example. We check the value, and then we might want to do something. So whenever like an attribute has changed, we might want to render something differently or something. And in the document, we use it like this, right? We have the loading spinner. We say mode and determinate. In this case, we can change it to something else. Inside the custom element, we can react to it. OK, cool. There's also properties, right? We can use getters and setters. In this case, we're actually getting the value when we ask for a property from the attribute, and we're setting it also to the attribute back when we're changing a property. This is what's called property reflection. So you make a change in property, you reflect it back into the attribute. Those are two different things. And then we can do something like this. We just query selector our element, and then we can just set properties, because it's just JavaScript after all, right? And again, we know how to do that. We do exactly the same thing with native elements. Same thing, just that it's our custom element. There's custom events as well, right? Maybe we have like a mode change event that we want to have that people can react to. And we do it like this. There's a custom event API. We give it a name. We can even pass it some additional data, like a payload that comes with the event. And then we can dispatch that particular event. And once that is done, again, we can go ahead. We query our spinner using like DOM APIs. And then we can add an event listener with that new name. Just yet another event, just like click or change or whatever. So we can do all that. Another thing that's interesting is that custom elements have so-called reactions. And reactions are basically lifecycle hooks for custom elements. And maybe that's something you've heard before, right? So there's obviously a constructor. So when you instantiate a custom element, this thing is going to be executed. There's the connected callback every time a custom element is being like attached to the DOM. This thing is going to get called. There's disconnected callback in case you're removing a custom element from the page. And there's the attribute change callback, the one that we've already seen. They're called reactions. And again, this sounds all very, very similar. It turns out that custom elements inside Angular already work very well, right? If we take a look at this, this is basically like an example of what an Angular template could look like. We have the loading spinner. We have a property binding for the mode property, right? That's where we're using the property binding syntax with the angle brackets, with the square brackets. We can bind to attributes as well if we want to with expressions. We can bind to events. In this case, it's mode change, or we have another property binding for value in case the mode is a different one. So Angular has been designed for this from the very first day, right? That's also why we have that syntax, because Angular enables us to bind to any property of any DOM object or DOM element, and it also enables us to bind to any event of any DOM element. It doesn't matter if it's like a native one or a web component like this one, right? It works with web components out of the box. And also, we see that there's a lot of things very similar in like both worlds, Angular and custom elements. If we take a look at it, we have host binding in Angular, right? It's a thing that lets you update attributes depending on certain expressions inside of your Angular components. There's the input thing, the input decorator. Excuse me, let me get some water because I'm getting very dry here. Much better. So there's input properties for property bindings. We have outputs for our custom events when we create components. And then there's lifecycle hooks, right? ng on init, ng on changes, ng after view init, and all of these things, which are kind of the equivalent to reactions. Now, if we take a look at that, we might think, what if we could take these Angular components that we're used to build, every day, and get a web component out of that so that it automatically works everywhere, right? So that we have like a standard-based thing. That would be great, because it's not only just our own components but we can actually take all the great tools like material components and make them work everywhere, just like that. Others do it too. Ionic, for example, Team Ionic has built a new compiler called Stencil.js. And they want to ship all of their Ionic components as stencil components. That's their current goal, right? So you basically write your components in stencil. It's like, if you will, the language, and it kind of has all the features, cool features from different frameworks like Angular and Vue and React and everything. But at the end of the day, it spits out a web component. So it's the same thing, if you will. And that's exactly where Angular Elements come into play. That's what Angular Elements tries to be. Angular Elements are Angular components packaged as custom elements, right? So they're basically custom elements on steroids, if you will, and they're designed to work outside of Angular apps. So this is literally to use outside Angular apps, not inside Angular apps. Because when you're inside an Angular app, you can just use Angular components, right? And again, this is all we have in Angular right now. Imagine you can take all of that and just get a web component that works everywhere, right? Okay, so this is how it works. 3 simple steps. You create your component in Angular with all the things that you know, selector, inputs, outputs, change detection, dependency injection, you get all of that, right? You just keep writing your components. You create a custom element out of that, and custom element, again, has like attribute change callback, all the other reactions. In this case, it will actually get some additional APIs that are specific to Angular, but at the end of the day, it's really just a custom element. It's called ng element. And then this thing needs to be registered as a custom element. And the good thing is, these 2 steps here, Angular takes care of that. So you just do your thing and tell Angular to create a custom element out of that, in theory. So here's what happens in a nutshell, right? Custom elements, like Angular components or Angular elements, are self-bootstrapping, so they bootstrap themselves doing the connected callback. You can put multiple of them on a page as standalone things, and it just works. For Angular, from an Angular perspective, it's really just hosting an Angular component inside a custom element instead of a native element. right? So that's kind of the thing that's happening. For Angular, it's not very different. And also, what Angular Elements does, it bridges all of the DOM APIs. So the thing that we saw with the lifecycle hooks and reactions and attributes and host listeners and input properties and properties, Angular takes care of that here. So it's Angular components on the inside, but standards on the outside. Very important, right? Consumers still just take custom elements. They don't even know, probably, that they've been written in Angular, ideally. And here's what it looks like in code, right? So let's assume we have a Hello World component. We define a list of our components that we want to package as custom elements. We define our ng module, because we know every component has to be part of an ng module. We import all our browser ng module dependencies that we need. In this case, it's a browser module. We declare our components on that module. And what we also have to do in this case, we have to add them as entry components. And entry components, in case if you don't know, is this property on an ng module that defines all the components that are created dynamically at runtime. So they're not like compiled from the template. We're not using them in any Angular template, really, right? That's what that is for. And then we need another thing here, because since we will still have to bootstrap this module to create, like, to compile these components, we still have to bootstrap it, but we don't have a bootstrap property with a component that we want to bootstrap. But it's required to have either a bootstrap property or this ng-do bootstrap lifecycle hook. I think this can definitely be improved in terms of ergonomics. This is what we have to do today. And then we can go ahead and import something called register as custom elements, which is something that Angular Elements provides. We import our list of components that we want to register as custom elements and our module. And then we just go ahead and we say register as custom elements. We give it all of the components we want to register as custom elements, and then we bootstrap our module. And once that is done, we just have, we can write our application and just write normal code. And this works with AOT as well, obviously. So that's the code side. And I said on Twitter that NGB is going to be the first conference I'm actually going to do some live coding. This is going to be the moment now, so keep your fingers crossed. Yeah, this is worth a clap. Thank you. Yeah. Well, actually not. Wait until I'm done. Okay, so let's start very simple. This right here is like an Angular application. We see here it's like a right here is the file tree. We only have this app module file. And on the right-hand side, we see the screen. I'm going to close this really quick. Let's just start with a Hello World component, right? So I'm going to go ahead, create a component, Hello World, selector, Hello World. And we have a template that maybe looks something like this, hello, and then either name or world. And then do something like that. And then we can say this is a hello world component, like that. Oops. And we probably want an input binding for the name, which we have right there. So this is our component. Then we need to put that on an ng module, right? So we create an ng module, which has some dependencies to work in the browser, which is the browser module. I'm also going to add the browser animations module because we need that in a second when we do something else. And then we add our Hello World component to the declarations of that module. So we say declarations, Hello World component, that's this one. We add it to the entry components as well. Right, it's a list of Hello World component, and this is a class, export class, let's say custom elements module, something like that. And as I mentioned, we need something that bootstraps this module, or, well, we bootstrap it somewhere else, but there's this requirement of having this ng-do bootstrap lifecycle hook. ng-do bootstrap, that looks good. Okay, it's right there. And now we can go ahead, and hopefully this works. I go into the index.html file. This is the document, right? There's just no Angular app right there. This is really just a plain document with just one headline. And now the idea is that I can just go ahead and say hello world. We know the selector of the component is hello world, right? So I do this, hello world, like that, right? And then it should just work. All we have to do now is register these components, which in our case is just one, as a custom element. So we use this API, register as custom elements, and then we give it the list of components, which in our case is just hello world component. And a function which returns a module reference. So we have to return platform browser dynamic, bootstrap module, and then this takes our custom elements module, which we don't have right now. Import custom elements module from, this is app. Oh. And we probably also need the hello world component. Hello world. Auto-completion can be very helpful, like that. Right, that's that. And then when this is done, we might or might not do something here, right? So we can do something like this. Something's going on here. But right now we don't want to do anything. We just want to render this element and see if it works. So if I run this, we should see probably hello world on the screen. Let's hope this works. Yay, it says hello world. Whew. So again, this is like an element. And I can even go ahead, since we have an input binding, if you remember, I can go ahead and set the input as an attribute because it's a custom element. And I say, maybe this has a different name. So I set it to my name, and it says, hello, Pascal. So that's working as well. And you can also work with it, obviously, in the DOM, in JavaScript. So you can say something like, like hello world components. Component equals document dot query selector hello world, and then say something like set timeout, takes a function, and we want to say hello world component dot name equals Igor, because he's not here right now, and we do that after 2 seconds. Excuse me. So we open it up again. Hope that it works. After 2 seconds, Igor, yay, so that works. So you see, it's really just like a native element now, just that it's a custom element with Angular powers. Right, let's take it one step further, because I still have some time. What if we can take Angular material components and use them just as elements? Right? Wouldn't that be great? Let's do that. So let's extend the application and say, I'm going to close this again. We want to have like the mat toolbar, and we need the mat toolbar module for that. And we also want the mat radio button and the mat radio module. And we get that from Angular material, something like that. That's the idea, at least. OK, and then we go to our module right here. We add those module dependencies. Let's see. I'm very slow in this editor. I'm very sorry, but this is better than nothing, I guess. So mat toolbar module, and then we need the mat radio module, this one. But we still need to define our entry components, like the material components as entry components. And I'm going to make it a bit shorter now by saying we have like a entry components list, components, typing is hard when 100 people are watching. Components, there you go. So again, hello world, and we have the mat radio button, and we have the mat toolbar, and this is the hello world component, right? Thank you for pair programming with me. That's good. Right there, hello world component, typos everywhere. And then we can define them right here in this list, entry components, hello world component is still declared in our module, right? This is owned by our module, not by the Angular material module. And then we can go ahead, import the entry components, and just change it right here and say this is entry components, like that. And entry components, oh, there you go. And let me actually remove this part right here. And let's say we want now, we want radio buttons, and by clicking a radio button, we want the name to change in our hello world component. So we can go ahead and say we have a mat radio group, I think it is, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I think it is. Mat radio group. Again, those are now just elements. And then we have a mat radio button with the name, which is the name in this case, and the value here, it's going to be mine. We have a label, like that, and then we can take this thing, we just copy it, so I'm a bit faster. Change that to Igor. Igor is the value. Igor is also the label of the thing. Igor, I wish you were here today. Right, and now we can go ahead and say, we get all the radio buttons. So radio buttons, document, a query selector all, mod radio button. Right, this gives us all the radio buttons on the page. And then what we can do is radio buttons, for example, we want to, whenever a radio button changes, we want to update the hello world component. Radio buttons for each button. And then we can say, on every button, we want to, for each. Oh, sorry, it's of course, it's a function that gets the button. There you go. And then on every button that we have, we want to add a event listener for the change event, which it has. And every time we're changing, we want to check if the radio button is checked or not. So we can say if button dot checked. Checked. Wow, typing is really hard. Checked. Wow, Jesus. And then what we want to do is, I still need the hello world component. I just deleted it. I'm sorry. Hello world, document, query, selector, hello world, like that. And then we want to say, okay, we just update hello world dot name equals button dot value. So whenever the buttons change and the button right now is checked, we want to update the hello world component with that name. Let's see if that works. Okay, so the first cool thing, we see material radio buttons right there. So they already render. And now if I click them, yay. There you go. Awesome. Again, material components, Angular material components as custom elements. You can use them everywhere like that now. Awesome, I'm so happy it worked out. First time. So let's wrap it up, because I'm really over time now. Angular elements make your components reusable everywhere. They might become Angular's standalone component model in the future. That's at least kind of the goal. And obviously some things still need to be figured out. You might have noticed that we still ship Angular on the page, because all the custom elements right now that are created from Angular still live with Angular's zone, Angular's change detection, and that kind of stuff. So all the packaging stuff that still needs to be figured out. Early stages, but I think it's a nice idea to see what's going on. I want to say thank you to George and Rob, because they helped me. Rob for his talks, and George really helped me by answering some questions. And I have the links to the demos here and a couple of resources. And thank you so much for listening, and have a great time. Thank you.